In this video, I'm going to show you how I took some 40k Dark Angels Terminators and converted them into what I think is a more Horus Heresy appropriate aesthetic. This project is probably the most intricate conversion I've done on this channel so far, as it does involve a fairly decent amount of cutting, filing, drilling, and intermediate sculpting. But there is nothing here I don't think you could do without a little bit of patience. For this conversion, you're going to need your base Terminator kit, some 1mm rivets from Zinj Industries, link below, fine grained sandpaper, in addition to all your normal conversion tools, green stuff, and epoxy sculpt. I also used these hammer bits from the Raven Guard bike kit to create my thunder hammers, but you can use whatever weapons you'd like here. For the base Terminators, I decided to use the Dark Angel Terminator kit mainly because I wanted my Terminators to be armed with storm shields, and I preferred the look of these shields to the ones that come with the Assault Terminator kit. This is of course a matter of personal preference, but I find the Crux Terminatus icon to be very 40k, and I wanted my shields to be more stripped down and functional. This kit is also packed full of other useful bits, such as some of the ones I used for my Apothecary and Herald Cataphractii conversions on this channel. Everything shown in this video though can of course be used for whatever Terminator kit you decide to use. The first thing I tackled though was removing all of the detailing and iconography on these models. Because these suits of armor are stopgap replacements for battlefield losses and not 10,000-year-old holy relics of 40k, I don't think that the Legion Artificers would spend a ton of time embellishing the armor. I also of course had to get rid of all of the Dark Angel explicit iconography, as I was not going to make these into Dark Angel Terminators. To do this, I started off by taking a fresh X-Acto blade and carefully cut away small slivers of plastic until I had cut away the majority of the detailing, but left the basic shape of the armor behind. I then placed my blade perpendicular to the armor and scraped away plastic to smooth down the piece, much like you would with mold lines. I must of course urge caution here, as I'm making a ton of quick cuts with a very sharp blade. There's always a risk you can cut yourself pretty badly, and I've definitely gashed my thumb a few times during this project. Please be careful here and cut at your own risk. Safety aside, the tricky part here though is that removing plastic in this way creates a flat plane where you scraped off, and almost all these armor pieces are curved to some degree. So I used some fine grit sandpaper to, well, sand down my models. This worked great to get the smooth, finished look I was going for, and it's as easy just running your bit over the sandpaper a couple of times. I'm not sure the exact grit I used here, as it came from a pack of modeling sandpaper I picked up on Amazon a couple of years ago, but I'll throw a link in the description below. Ultimately, I had to file off a ton of detailing on almost every single leg, chest, shoulder pad, even some heads. Of course though, if you pick a different Terminator kit, like one of the plain generic ones, there should be a lot less scraping and sanding you have to do. Now that all of the iconography was removed, I started on adding on some additional detailing of my own. Mainly, I wanted to add on various bonding studs and reinforced armor to these Terminators to give the visual impression that these suits of armor were still rather unrefined and chose additional protection over aesthetics. For the bonding studs, I started off by drawing out the rough location of where I wanted them to go using a fine tip Sharpie. As I will be drilling out holes for these rivets next, I found that by using the Sharpie like this, I could check the spacing and alignment prior to actually damaging the model, which is kind of a pain to fix later on. For the studs themselves, I decided to use these 1mm rivets from Zinj Industries, and they really make doing these as easy as possible. They are cast resin rivets that come with both a head and a stem, so all I had to do really was drill where I marked off before, clip the rivet off the resin block, and then glue it into the hole I just drilled. I still decided to do these one by one though, as I wanted to constantly check my spacing and make sure they still looked good. In fact, I changed where I was drilling a couple of times from where I marked off previously, as I thought this slightly tweaked location would look better. The one other thing I think that really helped getting the spacing right here was that each time I started on a new armor piece, I made sure to start in the center of the armor and work outwards from there. I found that as long as the bonding stud was located in the center of the armor, or in a line in the center, slight issues with spacing or alignment around those wouldn't really be noticeable and would still look good as a finished product. I also thought it would be cool to add some triangular rivets to the Marine's armors, which I tried to do by taking off these already sculpted rivets from the lightning claws in the Terminator kit, and gluing them on one by one to the chest piece. While this approach absolutely does work, and you can if you want slice off every one of these rivets from the lightning claws and add them on to a different piece of armor, this process takes so much time and is super finicky. so I only did this technique on a single piece of armor and used the round rivets for everything else. For the additional armor plates, I started off by using my knife to score the plastic where I wanted them to go. This was important, as the putty I was using really did not want to stick to the smooth plastic and would keep coming off, so by scoring the plastic, it provided something for the putty to grip onto. Speaking of putty, I used a mixture of about 50-50 green stuff and epoxy sculpt here. I used this mixture because green stuff is fairly tacky and rubbery, which means it can be kind of hard to work with for inorganic objects such as what I'm doing here. And while epoxy sculpt dries rock hard and easily sandable, it has a habit of breaking up or crumbling when being pushed around while sculpting. So by combining the two together, I get some of the properties of both, which makes it easier to work with, and it's sandable, unlike pure green stuff, which is huge for getting smooth finished pieces. To make the half armor plates, all I really did was take some of this putty mixture and spread it over the area I wanted to be up armored with my finger, which was dipped into water first. Once I was happy with the thickness of the putty, I used a sharp hobby knife to trim away any excess that extended past the plastic of the chest piece, and then set the piece aside to cure for a couple of hours. In order to make this look a little more like it was bolted on, I used some of these Zinj Industry rivets to, well, again, bolt it on. To do this, I took my 1.5mm drill bit and drilled a shallow hole just to the top layer of the putty, stopping when I hit the plastic underneath. I then used the same smaller drill bit from before and continued drilling out these rivet holes so I could insert in another one of these Zinj Industry rivets. Just this time, I decided to use a hex bolt head one as opposed to the round one. This is a pretty straightforward process, honestly, but I feel like these inset rivets really elevate the look of the model and provide a little more industrial look to it. In fact, I liked it so much that I decided to use it pretty extensively on the Storm Shield conversions. As mentioned earlier, one of my main reasons why I chose this kit as the base for my conversion was I really liked the shield design. But again, they're covered in a ton of Dark Angel iconography, so I had to bust out my clippers, knife, and sandpaper to remove and smooth down the shields to their basic shape. This left a blank canvas that would be perfect to just throw a decal on while painting and call it a day. But I wanted to add a little more visual interest to my conversion, so I decided to add a raised layer using some green stuff and epoxy sculpt. I mixed the green stuff and epoxy sculpt in about a 50-50 mixture and used my fingers, dampened with a little bit of water, to smooth out a thin layer of this putty over the bottom half of this shield. I didn't worry too much about getting the shape right here, and only that I had an even layer across the entire plastic piece. Once I had the putty spread over the bottom half of the shield, I took a sharp hobby knife and carefully cut 2 parallel lines down the side of the shield, as shown here, and then scraped away the excess putty. Once I was happy with how the sides of the shield look, I then turned to carving out the curved edges towards the bottom, which I did again by using my knife to trace out the general shape I wanted, then remove the excess putty to form the edge I want. For this second step, it is kind of hard to get these cuts exactly right, but if they're not perfect, that's okay. No one will ever really notice if one side is slightly wider than the other, or if your sculpting does not meet at the perfect point in the bottom. If you do want to fix your cuts though, you can always go back and add more of the putty mixture, blend it in with your fingers, and add some water and try again. You can even do this after the putty's already cured, as we'll see in the next step. Once I'm happy with the shape of the bottom of the shield, I set it aside to dry, as I really don't want to accidentally stick a finger in my work and mess it up because I was impatient. Once the putty is fully dried, I pretty much do the same steps again on the top half of the shield, just making sure to blend the still fresh putty into the previous work. To do this blending, I once again turned to a finger dipped in water and carefully smooth out the edges of the new putty into the old one. If it's not exactly smooth here though, that's okay, as I will be sanding down this later on. The one thing you have to watch out for at this step is these semicircular carved out pieces of the shield are kind of hard to get right with this top layer. If you wait for the putty to dry a little bit though, so it's not super pliable, then use your X-Acto knife to cut out these circles based on the plastic shield underneath, it's actually fairly easy and still looks pretty good. Once I'm happy with this, I once again set aside the shield to let the putty dry for a couple of hours, and then when I return to it, I use some fine grit sandpaper to get this shield as smooth as possible, much like we did with the plastic pieces earlier in this tutorial. I was pretty happy at this point how the shields were turning out, and was planning on leaving the center part of them blank as I wanted to use some decals to make them pop. But I thought a little more detailing would really help this look like an official model rather than just a conversion. so I decided to add some additional inset rivets onto the edges of the shield in the exact same way I did before with the chest armor. The one major difference here is that a few of these posts went right through the shield. That's okay, as all you have to do to clean this up is take your knife and scrape them away. I decided to go for a pattern of 5 of these rivets on each of my shields, but you're of course free to put them wherever you'd like. If you do happen to mess up though with one of your hole placements, you can always pack it with epoxy sculpt and smooth it out with a wet finger again. That sounded kind of wrong. Anyways, once the epoxy sculpt is dry, you can sand down that portion of the shield and it will look flat and smooth, and you can re-drill into it if you'd like to as well. With the shields done, I moved on to the last major part of the model, the weapon. I don't personally like the standard 40k Thunder Hammers, because I find them a bit too big for my take on 30k's aesthetic, but there's no reason you can't use whatever weapon you'd like here. For my Thunder Hammers though, I decided to use a modified Corvus hammer from the Dark Angels Ravenwing kit. This was a slightly complex weapon swap, as I wanted to also flip around the Corvus hammer, so this blunt piece was facing the front, but I also wanted to keep the energy field generator towards the back of the weapon, so to do this, I had to cut the hammer in 2 places, first where it connected to the hand, and also where the head connected to the haft. I then cut off the now back of the Thunder Hammer head, and reattached everything together using a pin vise and some paper clips to strengthen the bonds. This is of course a pretty high level overview of the weapon swap I did here, but if you want a deeper dive into how I do these, including all the basics of how you can do weapon swaps of your own, I'll throw a link in the upper right hand corner of this video for you to watch. I am really happy with how these models turned out, and I hope you picked up some useful tips and tricks while watching this video on how to convert your own Indominus Terminators. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'd love to see your own take on Indominus Terminators for Horus Heresy. Next week, I'll be releasing a painting video on how I did these guys, so if you want to see the final product of these models, please make sure you subscribe and click the alert button. As always, thanks for watching, and hobby on.